The Alipin refers to the lowest social class among the various cultures of the Philippines before the arrival of the Spanish in the 16th and 17th centuries. In the Visayan languages, the equivalent social classes were known as the Oripun, Uripong, or Ulipong. The most common translation of the word is servant or slave, as opposed to the higher classes of the Timawa, Maharlika and the Tamao, Majanu. This translation, however, is inaccurate. The concept of the Alipin relied on a complex system of obligation and repayment through labor in ancient Philippine society, rather than on the actual purchase of a person as in Western and Islamic slavery. Indeed, members of the Alipin class who owned their own houses were more accurately equivalent to medieval European serfs and commoners. Alipin comes from the transitive form of the archaic Visayan root word udip. It derived from the word meaning to let live, in the senses of letting a war captive live or paying or ransoming someone for a debt that exceeds the value of their life. Alipin were also known as Kiapang Dilahan in the Sultanate of Sulu, where they were distinguished from the Arab and European-inspired chattel slaves. As a social class, Alipin had several subclasses based on the nature of their obligations and their dependence on their masters. At lower ranks than the above were the Alipin of Alipin. The Alipin sa Gigilid of an Alaping Namamahay was called Bulisik, while an Alipin sa Gigilid of an Alipin sa Gigilid was known by the even more derogatory Bulailis. At an even more lower social rank than the latter two were Alipin who were acquired through war or who came from other communities. They were often treated as non-persons until they became fully integrated into the local culture. While the Alipin does, indeed, serve another person, historians note that translating the term as slave in the Western sense of the word may not be fully justifiable. Documented observations from the 17th century indicate that there may be significant differences between the Western concept of slave and the pre-Hispanic Filipino concept of Alipin. Some academics prefer to use the more accurate terms debtors, serfs, bondsmen, or dependents instead. The lowest class of Alipin originating from prisoners of war were traded like market goods initially. But unlike Western slaves, subsequent transfer of the Alipin to a new master was priced at the value of the bond. It was the labor obligation of the Alipin being sold, not the person. Most Alipin usually acquired their status either voluntarily, by inheriting the status of their parents, as a form of legal punishment for crime, or by being spared from execution after being captured in wars or raids. Alipin who acquired their status by debt were known as tinbos, and their creditors might sell their services for profit at the price of the debt incurred. The actual degree of obligations of the Alipin could vary considerably. It was dependent on the monetary equivalent of the obligation owed and was usually limited in duration. An Alipin could earn their freedom or gain higher status by marriage, being set free by their masters, buying it with their earnings, fulfillment of the obligations, or by extraordinary accomplishments and bravery in battle. The inheritance of the Alipin status was subject to a complex system of rules dependent on the offspring's condition known as the saya. For example, the first child of a male freeman and a female Alipin would be free, but their second child would be an Alipin like the mother. and so on with the rest of the children. If the number of children was not even, the last child would be a partial Alipin. The master of an Alipin Namamahai might also sometimes take one child of the latter as an Alipin. Sa Gigalid in the case of the latter's death. They might become Sibin or Genogatum of their masters and be set free upon the master's death. An Alipin who inherits the deaths of their parents was known as a Gintubo. Children of parents who are both Alipin were known as Ginlabos, while the children of Ginlabos were known as Lubos Nga Oripun. Partial Alipin retain their Alipin ancestors' obligations according to their degree of relation. The partial Alipin child of a Timawa and an Alipin, for example, will inherit half of their Alipin parents' obligations, while the grandchild of an Alipin will only owe a quarter. Half Alipin whose services were scheduled alternately by months are referred to as Bulan. They could also freely buy their way out of service if they can afford it. Part or all of the Alipin duties of the parents are often taken over by their children.